Planning it.
That one's just sort of hanging out. Not a problem. Okay, so then I just have to get this set up. This is my notes. This is the computer for the. I don't know if this is going to work. Let's see if I can do this. We got it. Boy, that's always fun. Okay, so I've got an extra one. Sure. Yep, we were doing that just a minute. You want me to see this? We're walking? Okay. We go get
Hello? I'm looking for another minute paper. You do it on IETF and just fill in the notes. Fill in your names, make sure it's plus, it helps.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me in the back?
What?
Okay. We're looking for another couple people who want to help with Etherpad. Sign in, go to the Etherpad, and fill in your name. We will start in about 2 minutes. So just switch between them and I'll stand up and that way you give plenty of people plenty of time. Pardon? Yeah, but just. Did everybody have a good lunch? Find some food? That's. Anybody go without? Find good beer. Any good beer someplace? Okay. I found good sushi. Hopefully you did. We're going to start IDR. This is the IDR meeting. We're only meeting once. We're running until 3 o'clock? 3:30. Okay. So folks, we don't have a real packed agenda. You can come to the mic and discuss things. I am going to note that there is the note well, that you may have read this before, but please read it again, that everything that is said here, that you say in a working group or any BOF, if you say it at the mic, it's under the IPR rules. And these contributions are subject to RFC 5378 and RFC 8179. Now, I am going to go over RFC 8179 because we had a little hiccup in one of our working group processes this last month. That was the late IPR discussion. So I'll go through in case someone missed how to do that. It's always good to refresh RFC 8179. And all of these contributions should adhere to the best practice. So let's go through the IDR agenda and do our agenda bashing. That means don't come up and bash the chair. That would be not nice. But everything else. Our agenda, John is not here this week. Ji-Dong is kindly helping me. Ignis is kindly providing scribing. Thank you to both of them. Ji is our secretary. We're going to do agenda bashing and chair slides. Part of the chair slides is, did we get all the drafts sent forward that you asked for? Have we missed anything? So pay attention in case your draft needed to go forward and we missed it. And then I'll go through the IPR because we had a late disclosure. And then we're going to go through existing drafts. Gunter, congestion control, BGP extensions for PC discovery. Then we're going to go through new work, which is the BGP model, the link state, and some segment routing. Was there anything else that we should add to this? Notice this is a light agenda. You'll probably end up with extra time, so don't have a problem with comments. Okay. Comments, questions, bashing? Somnolent working groups are great after lunch. Okay. This is a mea culpa from your chairs. We have been swamped by life outside. John and I are both encountering some unusual things. Usually we trade terms, and John's a very good co-chair with me. He usually picks up the slack, or I pick it up with him. But we're in the most in the midst of waves, and G and other people are helping us. But if we've missed something, John and I humbly apologize, but tell us what we've dropped. We're trying to catch things up. Okay, these are the drafts that are past working group last call. My understanding is that Alvaro was also having one of his transitionary times with having switched jobs. So he has two of the drafts at the RSG, which have been there for over 120 days. So they went to him before last IETF, and they're still sitting there. Mea culpa on Alvaro's part. He promises that when he returns, he will work on it. There are 5 drafts awaiting Shepard's report. It is my intent to sit down in the bar and just get through the Shepard's reports these next couple days. There is one Shepard report we could really use some help. One of these are my RFC 5575 BIS. I'll probably, if you would like to be a Shepard on any of these drafts, that's a position to which your chairs will buy beer, thanks, and very good things. But otherwise, we'd really like help. And I'll try to clear these Shepard reports within 2 weeks. John's got half of it done, and so he's really prepared a lot of things. Okay, early allocations. These are the ones we think we did. I checked them in the repositories. Did we miss any? If so, send a note to the chairs, and we'll try to get those done. Again, send it to me today, and I will try to send it to the IANA and Alvaro this week and see if we can get some progress. Please read it. These slides are all online, thanks to G. Okay, working group action. We have 2 working group last calls in progress. Both of those were requested by other working groups. The trill is in progress. There's some people who said they wanted to comment this week, so we've left it open. The BGP extended messages I just started off today. That fell between a time when John and I both got overwhelmed by stuff, so thank you, Randy, and other co-authors, Gayer, for the patience. I don't have any adoption calls. John went through the adoption calls and asked people, and they all said, well, we're going to make a little change. If you wanted an adoption call, if you would just, and we missed it, please send a note to the list, and I will, during this meeting, I will summarize those and send out a draft, a list of actions like I did last ITF. We got a lot of good feedback. These are the things that last time, that's the pointer to the last ITF's action list. These are the following adoption calls, but they didn't seem to get any further response if you still want them. And there are a couple there that are we ready for last call. John checked on the segment routing ones, and they said they were going to work on it. If there's something we've missed, please let us know. Do you have any questions? Okay. Chair slides are always... Okay. The IPR rules. Okay, one of the wonderful duties of a chair is to repeat IPR rules when we have problems. So let me go through the basic IPR rules, the problem, and then solutions that other working groups have taken. John and I tend to trust you all. You guys run the internet, you do a really good job, and we tend to trust. So I'd like to continue in the trust model and not the model that other working groups may take. So let me go through the RFC. 81, 89, and hopefully I've not transposed that number. It was the one you saw earlier. Has IPR disclosures that can either be made by the author, someone contributing or knowing that someone else's technology is impinging on their patent, voluntary disclosures of, well, they told me there was some IPR there, and that's how it gets put in. Now, there is an RFC that specifies if you don't behave well in disclosing IPR, there can be sanctions. So look at RFC 7001. Again, John and I would prefer not to, but those sanctions include taking an author off a draft. If it's an author-based, they include taking a draft out of Internet Standard and moving it someplace else. So it's all about timing. The phrase that's used is reasonably possible after the contribution is submitted. There are revisions when the technology is changed and you add an IPR. Or when the whole purpose behind this is to make sure that people are informed when they agree to a standard. Do you know that it has IPR? If you know and you agree, wonderful working group. And many times IDR will say, that's great. There is IPR licensing that is discussed in this RFC. The licensing terms are not required in the IPR declaration to the working group. If you want to put them on the website, most companies or individuals will put them on the IPR website. The terms suggested are reasonable, non-discriminatory. These terms are not to be discussed in the working group. Okay. Lastly, here's our problem. Draft ITF IDR BGP optimum route reflection had a late IPR discussion. When I come to working group last call, and we're 2 weeks into working group last call and about to close it, that's a very late IPR discussion. That almost borders into the cases in the RFCs for some sort of action. But the good news is we asked all of you in this mail message and said, do you think it's a problem? Nobody responded. And John and I will often said, say something if you think it's a problem. The duty of a chair, one of my wonderful duties, I'll make a face at that, is to say in the working group that you did this and that nobody really said anything. If you think there's a problem with this, please come talk to myself and G as John's person or talk to Ignis and he will forward us to us, because this is part of the call that's referenced in all of these RFCs. Okay. So when does IPR and IDR, and we generally trust you. John and I like to deal in a world of trust. The time that you get asked is when you have working adoption of an individual contribution and working group last call. And we also don't do what other working groups do, and they do an IPR call before they'll start the last call. Mostly you all are really good about coming to IPR responses. And so we tend to do it in parallel because it saves us time. John and I would like to continue this approach. We have a fide et veritate. Yes, that was Latin, folks. Trust but verify. We would like not to get to the trust but verify before we enter it. So this is the cheerful discussion that the chair gets to make after a late disclosure. If you didn't like this, disclose frequently. Any questions on this? Was anyone concerned with this draft? Okay, let the record show there was no one saying anything. Ignis, that's one thing I have to have. Thank you. Okay, we will go to the next presentation.
Hello, everybody. So,
You got these mics, you almost have to eat.
ooh, wow, I feel like a rock star almost.
You can take it out if you want, if that helps.
Yeah, let's see. I'll try this one, not a problem. So the reason actually I asked this particular slot here is because once, when we created this document, we went from a certain assumption that the readable label depth, the main use case was actually to actually use it for entropy. And that is a fundamental, assumption we actually made. So
Gunter, just a minute. Can people hear Gunter in the back? Is it soft? Good?
Looks good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now over time, it looks like there may be other use cases that can use, the readable label depth. So something what I'm, trying to assess with this particular, slot here is to understand that the simplification what we have made by putting them, both of them together into a single, signal in BGPLS is, if the simplification is good enough, to justify the restriction which is imposed. So let's have a quick look into it. So at the end of this session, what I would like to, achieve is to learn from you on, to separate, the entropy label capability again from the readable label depth, so that we can actually allow more use cases towards the future, or that we will keep the ERLD, entropy readable label depth itself. Let's have a quick look. So the concept is simple. So the RLD, the readable label depth, is something that you signal, that the router signals to, in BGPLS to say like, okay, if I get a packet in, these are the amount of labels I can actually read and do something with. The entropy label capability, is a router signaling, through, its mechanisms to say like, okay, I can do entropy and I can understand the entropy label from it. So that is it. So the way they are being used in ISAS and in OSPF, in the IGPs is they are like two independent, indicators. So the readable label depth is sent independently from the entropy label capability. So they're like two different signals here. So what we have done with the BGPLS is we said, okay, if the only use case for the readable label depth is to, have awareness of that for entropy, then why do we need to have these two signals? So we can sort of like put them together. So instead of signaling, independently the RLD, and signaling independently the entropy label capability. We sort of glue them together, and we said, okay, if you actually receive, the entropy capable readable label depth, then, that's the amount of labels you read, and at the same time, that is what you can use for entropy also. So that is the assumption we made. That is what is in the document right now. And even though the document, is in a fairly, fine state, we have not actually asked for any early allocations or whatever, because I was not really sure that was the right thing to do. So what I'm actually verifying here is, if the assumption we made is the correct one. Because if you look into, how technology has progressed, there seems to be like another, use case emerging here, which has to do with like alternate marking, where you start using some of these potential, MPLS labels, and you use them not for entropy, but you actually use them for passive performance measurement. So that's a different use case. So knowing that, is the assumption we made that we actually, signal, entropy and readable label depth in a single, parameter. Is it still valid, yes or no? So that is actually what I would like to ask, any thoughts on this particular, element? So it's off, yes.
So initial use case was indeed entropy labels. So what I see being published for accounting and some other things would require additional pair of labels being pushed, and not only pushed on ingress, but also read in the transit. So I think this work is becoming more relevant, more important to be able to figure out if accounting is mandatory, how deep should it go. So I wouldn't say it really belongs in PC computation, but awareness of how deep I can go read and create forwarding state and counters associated with it is quite important. So,
yeah. So just to confirm then, so what you are saying is that you have a preference for signaling the readable label depth, and then have like independent, like, bit parameters, kind of saying like, this can be used for entropy labels, this can be used for marking, this can to segment it up like that, or how do you see this?
It should be up to operator to decide. So usually your depth of where you could read is limited. So you should be able to choose whether you want to use it for entropy, or maybe counters are mandatory. So it's essential to distribute this information.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to you later.
Again, you've got limited amount of microcode in the stage, right? So yeah, I think exposing this capability is given operator to choose what they want to use my readable space for is important.
Yeah, but the thing is that, you can actually signal the readable space, but at the same time, you signal the capability of the router to do something with it. And to do something with it is, to actually use it for entropy, to use it for passive marking, to use it for something which maybe has not been documented yet.
In most cases, it's kind of agnostic. You've got the amount of microcode, you do single pass, you fetch, and you do something. So what it does is it's less important than how deep you could go.
Okay.
Stefan Kowski from Orange, speaking as co-author of the MPLS Spring Entropy Label Draft. So based on the discussion we had in Chicago, so we concluded that this RLD notion that we first defined was not enough, because we did not add the knowledge about the ability of the router to really read the entropy label within this RLD or not. That's why we concluded that this ERLD, which became now the entropy RLD, is something that includes the ability to read the entropy label within this amount of label. So yes, the conclusion is, if we have this definition of ERLD as it is defined today in the MPLS document, we don't need anymore the entropy label capability, because it's included in the ERLD definition.
So ERLD actually is in that particular, so I can, okay, cool. Then I can just export that in this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in my opinion, the IGP draft should also be moved to this definition. So not having this RLD plus ELC, but having a single ERLD to be consistent.
Okay, so what I've heard then is, probably more steady for the future, but the IGP stuff should be including this change then, basically.
We may see in the future, I don't know, some other use case that may involve RLD, but for other use case of entropy labels, in this case, we may have other RLD values to be advertised. But ERLD is really sticked to entropy label.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
John Mitchell, Google. I was going to just say that conceptually, you could imagine in a Spring use case that the controller could make more intelligent traffic engineering optimizations depending on the readable label depth and not require the deployment of entropy labels. So it seems that having those separate signaling mechanisms might be useful.
So I didn't catch the last part. So you like them to be separate or like in one parameter?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your response.
Sorry. So you like them to be, so I didn't actually
Yes,
understand.
I think it would be
separate or in single?
Yes, that they would be separate, I think would be a valuable thing so the controller could basically still use the readable label depth without actually the deployment of entropy labels.
Okay, so I just heard like two completely opposite preferences. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I forgot.
Okay, interesting. So I heard like two different, positions here, and I still don't know how to progress. So any indication maybe from the chairs on how to tackle this one, to keep it as ERLD like we have right now, and then the document is nearly complete, and we can go further with like asking early code requirements, or we actually split it up again. It's relatively easy to do, to progress, to make the modifications, but I would desire to do them only once.
Winter?
Did you want to go before that, Jeff? Because I'll let you talk if you had something to say.
So practically, you should be following IGP. You shouldn't be inventing your own stuff. In this case, you're really the transport for what's been distributed by IGPs. Don't go ahead. Just be able to transport what IGP have to say.
Be transparent. Okay.
Yeah, Stefan again. Yeah, I agree. We need to have this consistency between the IGP and BGP, and this must be defined within the MPLS document. So if there is any question regarding this must be addressed within the MPLS working group, in my opinion.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Yep.
Yes, I echo the request to let the IGPs figure out what they're going to do, publish that, and then have BGPLS follow along, mirroring that without introducing any logic different from just repeating what the IGPs did.
So that's a third opinion then. So
No, this is the same opinion as expressed by Jeff and Stefan,
Okay.
I believe. Is that, yes.
I think I have my answer then.
So that would be my personal preference, but I think that's what you're hearing from the rest of the people is
Leave it as it is.
follow it with the IGPs and leave it that way.
Yeah, which actually means like the document is almost ready then also.
So when you've double checked that,
Yep.
just
I'll let you know.
request on the list or send me a note even today. We'll start things off.
Cool. Thank you. That's it.
Sorry, I had one.
Yes.
Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. So this label depths, could we look at doing them as MSD subtypes instead of separately advertising them? We have a
I'm not
MSD.
sure what you're saying, but
There is an
repeat again?
MSD draft, maximum segment depth.
That's what you can push, and the RLD is what you can read.
Correct. But could we use the same as a subtype extent?
No, actually, we decided to to keep them quite separated because that's what is happening everywhere else.
So you and Sue discussed a conclusion. Could you repeat the conclusion you came to about what to do in this case?
My personal opinion was exactly you and Jeff follow the IGPs home.
Right.
But the other
that
question
mean-
he asked me was to up-level that as far as when he could go to a draft adoption. I said, when he's checked things and he's ready, send me and we'll do that. The other question was, how does he get input from the rest of the world? Please float this to the mailing list because we don't have everyone here this ITF because of the distance, so they make sure it gathers all the right. But, so you heard personal opinion, process, how to get an opinion from other
Right.
people.
And you're asking about adoption. Is that correct?
That
No,
Gunter was
it's already
asking about
adopted,
adoption.
but, yeah.
That's right.
About
So,
working group last call. not
right.
adoption.
Therefore, the conclusion, I believe, is wrong, that you should let this sit for as long as it takes for the IGPs and MPLS to figure out what they need to do. Do not advance this. That is my recommendation.
So, yeah, this was probably not going to be the only draft which is going to be impacted then, I guess. I think the MSD stuff is.
Could you repeat that? I couldn't understand.
Then I guess this is not the only draft, which is, following that sort of recommendation. There are probably more BGPLS, documents out there which can be, used to export certain IGP, attributes.
So-
Okay, but you've asked our opinion on this specific one. Stefan has said it's still very much in a state of flux,
So let the.
so you
chair
need
ask
to
one
wait. That's the opinion that I'm expressing. Just
Okay.
regardless of other issues, for this case, let the document wait until it is solidified in MPLS and IGPs.
Okay, do you know how long that will take?
No.
Okay. It's not impending.
So the authors of the IGP drafts are in the room. It should take as long as 15 minutes to update the draft, but besides the point. So as part of talking on behalf of MSD authors, we've created separate IANA registry for MSD types. So rather than creating, and we discussed this proposal before, rather than creating separate registry, it could go as MSD subtype and reference it from this document. And I mean, it would be logical to me, but it's really up to you.
Stefan, again, regarding the MPLS document, so there was a last call, working group last call about 1 year ago, which failed, but we normally fixed all the issues. So I expect a new working group last call to be sent, and maybe the good idea is to wait for this working group last call and ensure that we have the working group consensus to ensure that we can progress the IGP and then BGP documents.
Is there someone here from the OSPF or ISIS group that knows the status from that, on this work in that group? Okay, thank you for the input. That was very useful for the chair.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zhenqiang Li from 10 Mobile. Today, I'd like to update my draft carrier congestion status in BGP community. It is now version 6. In some circumstances, we need to know the link congestion status, especially for the inter-AS links. Here, the link congestion status includes the link bandwidth and its utilization. Egress peer engineering using BGP labeled unicast protocol needs this kind of information to aid MPLS routers to do traffic engineering on inter-AS links. In constrained multiple BGP passes, experts from France Telecom wanted to use the link congestion information as a metric to select the appropriate path among multiple BGP passes. Their purpose was to do proactive reaction to the congestion events. To aid a router to perform unequal cost load balancing, Cisco introduced link bandwidth expanded community to carry the cost to reach the external BGP neighbor. They said the cost could be either configured or derived from the bandwidth of the exit link. Let me use this figure to show the general benefit of knowing the congestion status. For the BGP speaker, within one AS, if router 7 and router 8 tell their internal BGP peers in autonomous system A, the congestion status of the X links, the peers in turn can steer some outgoing traffic towards the less loaded X link. For the BGP speakers across multiple AS, due to cost or network performance, ASA prefers ASB to access ASC. If ASA can guarantee as direct X links between himself and its neighbor, not congested through a link capacity expansion in time. But if the X link between route 2 and route 3 is congested, ASA should steer some ASC access traffic to the link between route 1 and route 6. For China Mobile, our province networks want to use this kind of information to do AS outgoing load balance. Our network topology is similar to this figure. ASA is our province network. ASB is our backbone network. When the X link and ASC is the network operated by other carriers. If the link between if the X link of backbone network congested, our province network should steer some traffic to the direct exit link of the province network. According to the comments and suggestions in the mail list and in the previous meetings, we provide several solution alternatives in its current version. Solution 1 is to use extended community. We need a new tab for, or we need new subtab for the extended community. We have presented this solution several times. A drawback is the size of the bandwidth field. We can only assign 8 bits for this field due to the limited space. Solution 2 is to use a large community. It seems that we have no way to define a subtype of large community to be the congestion status community. So this solution seems to be infeasible. And for solution 3 is to use a community container. Community container is versatile with flexible encoding format. At present, only type 1 is defined for wide community. And we want to define another one for the congestion status community with the suggested encoding format shown in this figure. Because we have enough space, so in this solution, we can define the bandwidth field as 4 octets. So S unit can be millisecond, can be million bits per second. Because the congestion status of a link is dynamic, we have to take some considerations when we use this feature in the field network. In this version, we given some considerations to avoid route oscillation, to avoid traffic oscillation, and to avoid forwarding loops. Please read the draft for details. Many thanks to Bruno for his constructive suggestions to improve this section. In this version, we also update the security considerations. The BGP receiver has the right to trust the congestion status community or not. We provide several deployment models. For example, the BGP receiver may choose to only trust the congestion status communities generated by some specific autonomous systems. And you can filter the congestion status communities at the border of your trust domain. Hence, all the ones you received are trusted. And you can record the communities you received over time, monitor the congestion status via probing, detect inconsistencies, and choose to not trust the sources which advertise the fake news. For IANA Requirements, Solution 1 need a new subtype for the extended community, and Solution 3 need a new type for a community container. So for this meeting, we do not want to talk more about the details of the solution. What we want is to justify our purpose and the problem. And the final solution can be chosen and improved after this work is adopted by the working group. So I think the problem we want to solve is clear, and some solution alternatives are already there. So I think this work should be considered to be accepted by the working group. That's all. Thank you.
Robert Rashford, Bloomberg. I have a question. So how do you plan to deal with the case when you have not one, but n different links between two ASBRs and single eBGP session, let's say with disabled connected check? And on all of those links, utilization is different. One is 20%, one is 80% because your hashing is bad, let's say. So how do you signal this particular scenario in your proposal?
You mean ASBR has several exit links, right?
Yes, between ASBRs, there's no one link, but n links because of the bandwidth requirements, and all are L3, not lag.
So usually for the exit links, we use a bundle. So to do the load balancing, usually we do not use separated links for the exit links, right? Anyway, we will consider this issue in the next version.
Okay, Jiedong, I think I can answer that question. Basically, this solution will work for the different peers, not for the multiple links for the same BGP session. So I think this is the applicability of this draft.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. I wonder whether actually the description of what the semantics of this are supposed to be is sufficient. Kind of the idea of having some indication of load and congestion on several paths to be an important input for routing decisions is clear. But when one defines a specific coding scheme to signal that, I think the ideas of, well, okay, how to derive, well, okay, that's partly done in the draft. How to derive the actual signal from observations, and what to do when you see the signaling, I think needs to be done. And well, okay, the considerations on oscillation quite certainly are kind of crossing that territory, but kind of that does not look like anything that allows to prove that oscillation can be avoided, cannot happen. Rather, well, okay, let's see and observe, and then fix whatever the implementation and configuration is. In the complex interworking of BGP systems, that does not look like a really convincing approach to me. Though it has been taken in the past once in a while, I have to admit.
I would recommend you take a couple of these examples to the list, and to get more feedback, I would recommend you take a couple examples like Robert's example or another one to the list and see if you can at least hear what people are saying about it. So I would recommend you provide a couple examples of your proposal to the list and have a discussion.
I will do it in the list.
Just
Hello. Yeah. So this is Dhruv, and on behalf of my co-authors, I'm presenting the PC discovery via BGP. So this draft has been presented in the PC working group in the past. So we also wanted the inputs from the IDR, and that's why for the very first time, I guess we are presenting in this working group as well. So the idea here is that in the PC architecture, we have a path computation element which does the path computation, and you have the client which requests it. What happens is we would like the PCEs to be discovered by the client automatically. And this concept has been there in the PC architecture for the longest time. And along with the PCEP protocol, the IGP discovery mechanism was published long ago. Those are the 5088 and 5089 RFCs. But as we can imagine that this works when both the entities are participating in the same IGP. So of course the PC discovery mechanism does not work in some of the cases, like when we are doing interdomain path computation and you have two different PCs, part of two different AS, and there is difficulty in discovering that relationship automatically. Mostly this needs to be configured. Within the PCE, we also have a concept of hierarchy. So sometimes the top level PC, which is the parent PC, and child PC may be not participating in the same IGP, or they might not be even be an IGP at that layer. So how do we discover? Usually we have stick to configurations at that time. And at that time, we did not have something like BGPLS as well when we were thinking of the same problem. Now we have a BGPLS. And because of BGPLS, there is a relationship between the PCCs exporting the topology to maybe a PCE, which is also a BGP speaker, and receiving this topology information via BGP-LS. So now the question also ends up, can we reuse the same relationship that exists, the same BGP session, also to advertise the PCE information back to the PCC? So that's the basic motivation and little bit of history behind this work in the PCE working group. So basically, there are two modes. Either the PCE and BGP speaker are co-located, which in an SDN controller, centralized controller world is pretty common, that the same box is implementing both functionality. So it can use the BGP session to advertise or to let people know where the PCE is, what is the characteristics of these PCs, etc. In some cases, if there is a PCE and BGP are two different entities and they have their own mechanism of how they are learning it, the main idea is between BGP speakers, where the BGP-LS session exists, we can also advertise the PC information. And how do we advertise this? We'll cover. And then we can also reuse some of the BGP policy mechanisms to say on which session it should be advertised, on which session it shouldn't, where also the BGP helps us much better than a simple IGP way of doing this, right? So that's the overview. How are we going to do this? We propose a new PCE NLRI, and inside this PCE NLRI, you have like any other, you have the protocol ID, you have the identifier, and then the descriptor, which is the address of the PCE. The rest of everything is in the similar BGP-LS way of doing things, that you have TLVs, and these TLVs are kind of aligned to how the IGP TLVs are defined in 5088 and 5089. So the main idea is you need to know the IP addresses of where the PCE is, and which IP address does the PC prefers to be used when you are connecting a session to it. So that's the descriptor. Apart from that, we want to also know what is the attributes of these PCEs. That is, what kind of path computation it is able to do. And this semantics is already defined in ISIS and OSPF. So we reuse the same formats. And capability is what is the capability of PCE, whether it can do, for instance, stateful computations, whether it can do multicast and P2MP computations, things like that. The domain information, as well as the neighboring domain informations. All this information can be added, and of course these are optionals information as well. So this is the overall like encoding part, especially from the BGP point of view. This data is completely an application data. It doesn't impact BGP forwarding or forwarding state or routing state in any particular way. We would expect that there would be a policy that will play an important role in deciding when this information can leave a particular domain, whether we want to expose it, and that's where the policies can help quite a bit. And overall, if from the BGP point of view, do we think that this information will have any operational issue? Ideally, the PCE information is quite stable. It's not something that changes that much in a network. You have the PC address, PC capabilities, those things are quite stable information. So adding that information into this protocol, we don't see operationally as too much of a constraint on the BGP protocol overall. And where are we? Basically, we feel that this is not trying to replace the existing mechanism. The 5088, 5089 has a complete place within the domain, within the area when both the parties are part of the same IGP. IGP is the preferable way to advertise this information. But when that is not the case, can BGP be used, especially if the BGP-LS session already exists and you are translating some traffic engineering and other related information on the same session. So we have discussed this in PCE. We also wanted to bring it to IDR working group and get some eyes from the BGP point of view that what we are doing is correct. And if there are any comments, we are here to listen to you.
Hi, Ketan Talavlikar, Cisco.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed in the draft is for the encodings, you point to the ISIS,
Yes.
but actually the TLVs in ISIS and OSPF are different. So it may make sense to actually define them or have the right sizes.
Okay.
Okay, it's ISS has 1 byte type length, OSPF has 2. BGPLS generally follows OSPF 2
I
bytes.
thought we followed ISS more, right?
Two.
In BGPLS?
2 bytes.
We'll check. I'll check.
Yeah,
This
sure.
is not, I'll handle that issue. Not a
Yeah,
problem.
And the other thing is the solution and the use cases scenarios that you mentioned
Yes.
in your slides. This is not really covered or explained in the draft. So I think it will be good if you could describe these scenarios and the use cases.
Okay.
That'll make the document better.
Very valid comments. Actually, one of the reasons why we in PC, we have a document which gave the requirements for discovery. And when they wrote this requirement, I don't know, ages ago, at that time also they said that IGP is the one, but in future BGP could be explored. And when it can be explored, these are the higher level points that need to be considered. But at that time, BGPLS did not exist. We were never using that, so did not make sense. So, but I kind of agree. We will revisit, refer where we can of an existing document. And if something's from BGPLS point of view, which did not exist back then, we definitely need to add into the document now.
Right. So what the IGPs covered was, within a specific area or the IGP domain-wide AS level. But now we are getting in scenarios which are inter-AS and things like that. So I think it would help.
Are you concerned about specific scenarios that you thought might not interwork?
Yes.
Are you concerned about load?
Yes, so there is, kind of redistribution going from IGP to BGP there and then spread out across BGP again. So I just wanted to get some more
It would
detail.
be good to go through those scenarios. That is something that would, you should propose the scenarios you're concerned with on the IDR list. You should respond. That'll get you some of the feedback. Also going through some of the scenarios on the list will help you get the right feedback.
Thank you. Thanks for your comment.
Okay. Next one's mine. Okay, this work is pursuant to the revised data store work. So in this talk, I will be doing some chair hat on and then some chair hat off and honor author hat on. The other authors decided not to share the square with me, and so I will try to clearly delineate. Otherwise, we thought the square would be a little crowded. Kier Patel and Mahesh really did a lot of the heavy lifting here. I've done a lot of the sanitation checks to see that it aligned with our work that we've done over the last 3 to 4 years on BGP modeling. So what is this? This is the draft MKS. It's Mahesh, Kier, and Sue. Is really a revised data store version of our current model, which was based on OpenConfig. We have a problem. In the IETF, they've decided to move to revised data stores for new data models. The original data model from OpenConfig, after lots of discussion in the NetMod group, is not going to be adopted. And when we've talked to the OpenConfig people who authored the structure in the original BGP model, they've got a lot of deployments. 2 different models, 2 different decisions, people looking at it different ways, and IETF has gone one way and OpenConfig has gone the other. This, of course, brings me to angst, discouragement, whatever, because there's a lot of deployment, and IDR and John and I believe in deployment learning. And we always like to interoperable specifications. Well, the OpenConfig have 10 or 15. So this general idea is worked out fairly well in the data models. So we're in a struggle. Here we've got a lot of deployment, a lot of good thought, a lot of good operator input, and here we've got to non-workable models. Two different ways to look at state, both valid but different. So just to give you a little bit of input, the draft NetMod revised data stores might put MTU has a set of, excuse me, let me take a step back. Our current model has a candidate and a startup, and you put it into running, and that goes into some sort of intended, and it gets installed in operations. The revised data stores allows for dynamic config data stores, and that could be done in VMs, and it can be ephemeral like the IR2S has been working on. It can bring in system state, it can bring in other things. This revised data stores allows all that to happen and is a good thing to go forward with VMs or ephemeral state or other things we know we want to do. The open config model has config and config state where you actually denote inside the variables. Therefore, they're just not going to mix. That's just a little explanation of why they're different. Same information, different way to lay it out. So here's a proposed solution. This is okay, chair hat on with proposed solution. Most of that's been a discussion as a co-author on both drafts, what's different, and why I could be happy with both drafts. Kayer and I have reviewed the models to see that they contain the same information. They're in different formats, but we wanted them to be equivalent, not the same, but equivalent. The word equivalent is important. So our thought, and this is something I've had long discussions with our routing AD, Alvaro's not here, but you can talk to him or myself or Aaliyah or Deborah about this as well, is to actually publish the open config model. It won't go as standard, but to provide it as an informational draft, because there are a lot of people who are using it and it's a good piece of work. And then to move the revised data store model forward, because that's the only one that we're allowed to, that our ADs feel should go forward, and that's what the NetMod working group. So we've created this draft with Mahesh's help and Kayer's help and my review that does that. This has the idea that we'd like to publish it. Well, then I ran into the problem that Lou, hi Lou, mentioned this morning, that we want to publish both models simultaneously. Well, because we don't have versioning, Lou, we can't say version 1 of BGP model was the old one we adopted, and the next we have to rename them. So we've got to deal with that particular piece. But other than that, we could rename them. We could rename the old one to BGP, IETF BGP OC for open config, and the other one to IETF BGP. Now, this is the thing that we're sort of stepping stone before we do any additional features. Again, chair hat on, it seemed fair and respectful to the open config people to give them an equivalent IETF revised data store model that they could go and work with in their environments. We've tried to keep most of the variables the same. However, they can't be totally the same because there's this -state requirement in open config. At that point, still chair hat on, would be the time we would derivate, and you would allow upgrades. Now, I don't know how the ADs will handle upgrades to open config, but it is an open value. It is hopeful that we could create an IDR GitHub repository and put the Yang up there for both. This is just one way to go forward. It is just a way. You can get the GitHub for open config openly, and the revised data store would go. By the way, the reason I mentioned putting it up in GitHub, this was an encouragement from Benoit to have working groups put their Yang models up in GitHub. Robert, did I miss anything from our discussion?
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So just one comment about the namespace issue, that given that the Sorry, is that better? So regarding the namespace issue, given that the open config models that people are implementing are actually using the open config namespace, it sort of doesn't matter what namespace you use for the open config models in terms of what you put into that draft, because that's not what people will actually implement. They'll actually always implement the open config namespace. So if you do use a different name for that, you don't have any versioning issue. You just split them automatically because there's no issues there.
Okay, let me repeat because I'm not hearing quite as well. That's the room, not you. The open config model and the revised data store model have to have different names.
But it's not, when you publish this informational model and you get an IETF namespace, that's not what people will be implementing. They'll be implementing the open config one with the open config namespace. So, so what namespace you put in the draft sort of doesn't really matter because nobody's going to actually ever implement that particular version with that namespace.
Go ahead, Mahesh.
I think, Robert, Mahesh.
You can't hear me either?
All right.
Okay.
I think the question is, you're referring to the original IETF draft for BGP, right? And the name of the model within the namespace. That was written with the IETF namespace. True. Yes, no one implemented, or at least no known implementations are known at this time. So, but if we want to publish it, even as an informational draft, we have to give it a namespace. Yeah. And that namespace would be IETF's.
But you could call it IETF BGP open config.
That was my suggestion. Call it IETF, IETF BGP open config. That's fine.
Yeah. Hi, Lou Berger. So that's there's a couple of different points. The first is if they have different names, you don't have a versioning problem. They're not related. You have you don't have a naming, you don't have a versioning problem. They have different paths. They're different models or modules. They're just not related. The other question, which is a little more concerning to me, is the point that was made that I think we just heard some agreement from people at the mic, including yourself, is that no one should go implement the OC version. So if no one should go implement it, why are we publishing it? What I heard is that there are multiple implementations of an open config model within the open config namespace.
No, it came from IDR. It is now currently the IDR BGP model. We are switching off of it.
All right. Well, if you expect people to implement it, sure. Then publish it. Then go ahead and publish it. No problem. It just means that Rob Wilton's comment was not accurate.
Yes. Okay. But
that's fine.
But the
So Rob Wilton's, the question is to the room is, have people implemented the open config model with the open config namespace, or have they implemented the IETF draft that is the one's going to become?
I will let Kayer answer that question.
It's currently unimplementable because it doesn't even compile. So there can't be that many implementations.
Well, the reason it doesn't compile is because it doesn't compile within the IETF context. If you bring in a whole bunch of things from OpenConfig and modify them a specific way, you can get it to compile.
Well, even then, actually, it will not, because
Yes, it won't.
OpenConfig has now moved to their own type definitions. So,
Kayer's turn. Thank you.
So, Kayer Patel, Arcus. I think to answer Rob and Lou's question, there are implementations, but they are purely OpenConfig based. And if you take OpenConfig's model as they are, and you compile them, there are no compilation issues, right? So if you take them, then I think I know vendors who have implemented it. Maybe a variant of that, but along those
Okay,
models.
so I'm going to up-level this for just one moment. The reason why you might ask, why would I like to see it published here? Because the BGP selections inside that model are wise. They pick some really, I'm not talking about the model, but the BGP content, the choices they made in BGP are wise. And that's the piece that I want to make sure we have a copy to be respectful of where we got the IPR from that made these wise BGP choices. And then we have the other. Otherwise, I feel like we're taking their work without credit. And that would be, in my estimation, non-respectful of all the contributions they have made.
Yes. Okay. So one, but then in that case, it might be better rather than publishing the models, the YANG models in that informational draft, to publish references to the particular version of the open config model that you're saying is people should adopt and use and standardize or implement effectively. Would that not be better rather than creating a third model in a different namespace? It creates more confusion.
Okay, so there's another option. Let's take that offline.
John,
Karen Mahesh, did you understand where that was going? We should just take that one offline.
I basically had the same comment. I just want to agree. Like, I don't understand why we would publish a new namespace in the IETF space if we're progressing an informational draft. You can just reference the open config model directly. I'm not sure what the purpose would be to be in the IETF namespace if it's informational.
Okay. I guess I'm going to take a step back. It seemed reasonable because people came and gave their contributions at IDR and had ported it forward. I will take this to list as far as a decision, whether we publish both.
So it's Lou again. One modification to Rob's proposal is to publish the work, but not publish it as a full model. Say these elements were very important for us in building our model. So here's the structures that we're using, the containers, the portion, and just publish that as informational, but not as a compilable module. And then that way you, one, recognize the work that was done, two, ensure that you don't have all the reference problems that we're still grappling with because it was an IETF contribution, you can use it, and you don't end up with a compilable module which really no one's going to use that'll confuse people. So maybe there's a middle ground there.
Okay, thank you for that input. Karen, any other
Can I make
thoughts?
one last comment? Kir Patel. I think it is important that we go ahead and publish this maybe as an informational or of some sort. The only reason being there are shipping implementations that can be referred.
This is an important point. It's Lou again. Are the shipping implementations within the IETF namespace or the open config namespace? So this document would be in the IETF namespace, not the open config namespace. We can't publish an open config document.
I think we need to take, Lou, I think we need to talk offline on this. Apparently, we need to work on it. We have plenty. Rudiger, if you had input, please give input. We were designing on the fly, and the people who are working on it ought to go off and figure out our life together. But if you have good input, you probably would tell us.
Well, I'm getting confused. What I wonder, and I'm not sure whether that has any relevancy, is, well, okay, publishing stuff is fine. Publishing stuff about stuff that has been implemented is even better. However, after talking with people recently, I learned that some vendors have their own models that they implement, and then they are doing mapping or transformation of models. And I wonder whether the stuff that you want to publish, actually you are going as far as explaining how the mapping and the transformations actually work. If not, well, okay, it's nice to have a publication and make sure that the audience of the documents don't get too much confused about the various models that are in the space.
Okay, I think you've given me even more information. Thank you, Rudiger. I will take it under advisement, both within a discussion to hear with the authors and other people, whether it's reasonable to publish the open config. We will go forward with an adoption call for the MKS draft, since that's a revised data store. And you will see stuff on the list once I get enough advice on the publishing of the old document. But we do need to move Chairhead on to this revised data store. Does anybody have any problems? Question for the room from the chair. Does anybody have any problems going for an adoption of this revised data store model?
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Himanshu from Sienna. I had sent you an email about some attributes that were not covered, the per neighbor, per address family. And you said you will look into that, and that because I believe there was one of the draft that had all those attributes. Then you merged with the
Yes, I remember.
and it all got lost.
We missed that then. That's my fault. Let's pick that up afterwards. I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Okay. Can I just get can you just either re-forward the draft or the original message so I make sure I've got it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. Okay, any other concerns about adopting the revised data store? That seems to be the easy path. The rest, I will work with John and all the rest to see if I can come up with what I should do with the open config. And then we'll send requests out to the list. Any other questions? Now, the final thing that's in here is once we settle on the revised data store model, we will then take model drafts on extensions. The revised data store model and the model that we had picked up with IETF BGP originally from the open config, the BGP portion took a subset of BGP and we put other things for extensions. Once we adopt this, we will adopt extensions, and for the best working group, this is where we ought to make sure that we're sort of in alignment. Okay. Any other questions on this? Thank you for the excellent feedback. Okay, we'll go on to the next one.
Next one is Gaurav.
Hi everyone, this is Garuda. So hi, this is Garuda with Cisco Systems. So I'm presenting it for this SRv6 BGP-LS segment routing document. Just reminder, there is some architecture and the network programming.
You gotta really
Architecture and network programming guide, which is out there. Please read that. It gives a lot of good information. Also, right out of this, I'll be presenting the service chaining draft, so you'll get the idea what we're trying to do. Problem, we all know what BGP-LS does, so I don't have to go into the details of it, but essentially what we're trying to do is to enable a way for the controller to learn about my local SID table, which is defined in that network programming document, what it is, how it does, all that details are there. And of course, enable the topology in the segment routing v6 and also the services, like service functions and the subparts, which we call segments. And again, those details are in that programming document. So solution, we're defining a bunch of TLVs and sub-TLVs to signal this information from the nodes to the controller to enable the SRTE or other, segment routing based solutions. The first TLV is a node attribute TLV. So at a high level, we have defined the TLVs which we need as node attributes. And this is again in RF, the base BGP-LS RFC, but the node attribute are attached to the node TLV, and we're defining two more node TLVs, the capability TLV and a SID TLV. The capability TLV is responsible for announcing the capabilities of the router, what it can do, the support for the SRH. These are the sub TLVs which are defined in the IGP draft, which we have published for segment routing v6. We are encoding same information in BGP-LS. Instead of going in IGP, you're sending it from the node to the controller. So nothing fancy there. All the details are in the draft. So if there are any questions, we can discuss it on the list, or please feel free to send me an email. I can help answer that. SID TLV is essentially how do you encode the SID or segment identifier, like end and T function, NDX6, and signal it from the node to the controller. So simple. Link attribute TLV is the TLV which we are defining again to encode the agency information. It could be a peer-to-peer link or the LAN, cross-connect direct link. Two attributes are defined for the link attribute. We have the P2P cross-SID TLV and the LAN cross-SID TLV. P2P, as we know, it's just to define the P2P information. So we are having a SID size, which defines how many SIDs are encoded, the SID value, some IGP information. Those extensions are defined in the ISIS draft. And the last slide I have, so this slide is about the same information, similar information in a LAN TLV. The only difference here is the neighbor ID, whether it's an OSPF or the neighbor ID or the system ID, ISIS system ID is encoded. SID size and SID value is encoded. The last one is a function TLV. So once we have defined the SID, which needs to be sent from the node to the controller, we also need to signal a sub TLV, which tells for which function this SID is associated with. So we tag that information in a sub TLV and send it to the controller. And that's next steps. Keyur.
Hey, Keyur Patel, Arcus. Hey, it's a great draft. Disclaimer, I haven't read it. The question though I have is, you're carrying an SRv6 information here in LS, right?
Yeah.
What happens if my v4 and v6 SAFIs have tunnel encapsulation attributes? Which one should win out?
You mean signal that in BGP-LS? The tunnel encap attributes?
Yeah, inside standard v4 and v6.
But that's not specific to this document.
Yeah, but it's specific to BGP.
Yeah.
So which one should win out? The question rather I'm asking is, do you want to reconcile this information inside tunnel encapsulation?
So
if not, why? You probably want to clarify it in the draft.
Right. So we can clarify that, but the way the BGP-LS is being used right now for the discovery of the nodes and services, that's the standard way. We don't know of implementations which are doing or using the tunnel encap attributes, but we can discuss that, offline as well. Go ahead.
Just answer. Number of TLVs here define hardware capabilities, and it looks very similar to MSD capabilities. Why not? So you're reinventing wheel a bit in terms of signaling.
So it is, in my opinion at least, it is better to put SRv6 capabilities in one piece instead of putting a small piece in MSD and small piece in RLD and a small piece in SRv6 capability. Just put it in one piece implementation-wise, Yang model, show commands, everything is simpler this way. Not really. There is something called MSD and there's something called SRv6. SRv6 has all SRv6. In fact, in my opinion, we should not be really dividing the capability related to a feature into 2-3 pieces. Just put it in one place.
So if you build both software and hardware, I might agree. In disaggregated world, when you need your hardware to signal what's supported, and believe me, it's difficult enough to get Broadcom and others to implement this API. If you start creating variety of them, it will confuse everybody. You'll introduce new bugs and
No, but in fact, actually, I would argue the information which we are encoding in different other documents and different other ways, it may be more confusing than doing in one standard way with.
Yeah, it is
routing
basically
six.
the way it works is that it gives you the information in whatever format it has, depending on the API. You encode it in a different place. The way you encode it is protocol dependent. The way they give it to you is hardware dependent. These are two separate things. But if they give you this information, SRv6 information in one piece, and you divide it at half of it in one TLV and another half in a different TLV, I think it's much harder implementation-wise.
Okay, Mark Chen from Huawei. So I want to mention that there's another draft that's also define similar function like this one, but have different.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
There's another draft also define similar extensions, but there has some different definition about the TRV, for example, the type and the length, field length, and some other. But the thought is similar. I think we can discuss offline.
Sure.
How to improve it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Ketan,
Yep, you have the
Ketan Dalavlika, Cisco. Jeff, you mentioned that the information is redundant. I didn't quite catch that. The information signaled mentioned here and in the MST drafts are redundant. Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm speaking for the next one. So we are, in this particular document, we're proposing a service chaining architecture with using segment routing. What we are asking for IDR in this particular document is the BGP-LS extensions. I'm presenting both drafts. One is the BGP-LS extensions for service chaining, and the segment routing, service chaining, data plane document, just to complete the, have the full picture of what we are trying to do. All right, so just as a reminder again, the network programming is, again, the main document. We have defined all these functions which we will be talking about this document. Some of the functions are defined in that service chaining document, which I mentioned in the first slide. Also, it will be good to review how the SRH header encodes this information. How do we do the overall architecture with service chaining, topology nodes, and other stuff. Those details are in the SRH document, the segment routing header document. Problem. What do we want to do? We want to enable service chaining and also have other attributes of the traffic, because we are seeing there's a lot of discussions and talks about how do we do segment routing, which solves one problem. How do we do service chaining, which solves another problem. This solution is just trying to integrate all of that into one solution. How do we discover these services? How do we discover the associated SIDs or service SIDs, as we call it, with those services? And end goal is to provide a solution which is simple, flexible enough, and scalable, which we can all deploy. So what is a service function? I mean, we all know what service function is, or what services are. In this particular document, the main service chaining data plane document, what we're describing is a notion of SR-aware service functions and SR-unaware service functions. So you have SR-aware functions which can actually understand segment routing, and they can process the traffic based on some local SID value which is associated on that particular node. SR-unaware means that it needs somebody's help to signal that information from the node to the controller. So it could be a VPP node or some other open source node, or a router, or a top of the rack switch. And we are calling those functions as SR proxy or segment routing proxy functions. And it's acting as a proxy on behalf of the services which are attached on that node. Services so in this particular case, for SR proxies, we have different proxies which we have defined based on what their role is and how those proxies are implemented. We have, a static proxy, which is similar to what we do today. You configure something, and I have a slide which covers that. We have dynamic proxies, shared memory, and masquerading. I'm not covering all of them today in the presentation, but they are defined in detail in that service chaining data plane document. So if there is any questions or comments, all those are welcome. We can discuss it on the thread. So what is a static proxy? Static proxy is it's today's solution, how you do today, where you are configuring the static information about the function or services on a particular node. And it's a pre-configuration. The pre-configuration in this particular case says you have a SID associated with that pre-config. You have an outbound interface going from a VPP to that service function. And you have an inbound interface where some policies are attached. So when the packet comes in, I think it's hard to read, but I'll try to explain. So in this particular case, you have an SRH header where you have a segment list which is associated there. You have a segment which is E1::A. When the packet comes to VPP with E1::A, the VPP knows, this is something which I have configured over here, and it's a static proxy. It does a lookup, it decaps the outer header, sends the packet over to the function or service. It does something, comes back, and then on the ingress side, on the input interface, you have another inbound policy which is configured, which could be some PBR policy or some policy, and that will put the header back and send it to the next segment by copying that C2::1, which is the next SID, into the destination address and send it out. Right now we are giving just an example of an IPv4 as an inner header, but it could be IPv6 or it could be an Ethernet. This solution is fully flexible to be able to do that. We do maintain a per chain static configuration, just the nature of it. This is how it's deployed today. What you achieve with this static proxy is that you can integrate with the segment routing, where you can have some SLA requirements like delay or latency or jitter, delay and latency, and you can combine that with the services which you want to configure in your network. So it's just enabling the current functionality or current solutions with segment routing. Dynamic proxy is a little bit more flexible. So you have, and this solution again is for both SRMPLS and for SRv6. So we have a SID which is associated, which is E1::B, and that has, the packet comes in with E1::B. The VPP looks at the packet and says, oh, this SID is mine, I need to do something. It decaps the outer header, caches that information locally, sends the packet, the inner IPv4 packet to the service, comes back from the service, and then it puts the header back and sends it out on the wire by copying the next segment ID, which is C2, into the destination address, and it goes out. In this particular case, we are not doing any static configuration. In fact, again, this is dynamically configured. The main goal of enabling these proxy functions, whether static, dynamic, masquerading, shared memory, is as we are developing the nodes which are fully capable of segment routing, and that work is also ongoing. This is the way to be able to enable these services and integrate them with the segment routing and all the benefits which segment routing provides. Again, the inner header can be IPv4, IPv6, or an Ethernet. So the solution is fully flexible. Oh, sorry. All right. So from an IDEA point of view, we are requesting some BGP LS extensions to be able to discover these services. We are also proposing some sub-TLVs to encode the service information, which is the services-based data model, and signal it from the node to the controller. Service chaining attribute sub-TLV is requested in this draft, where you have a service type, which is a new registry, which is also requested in this draft, which defines the kind of service it is, whether it's a classifier, firewall, DPI, any kind of those services. It also requests what the traffic that service is capable of handling. So, and it's an OR operation, so it can be one or both or many. So you can have an IPv4, IPv6, Ethernet, any of those as the inner headers. This is just for the controller to know that when it's creating this SRH header, whether it should include this particular service node as one of the node in the SRH header. Opaque metadata, we realize that there will be a lot of information which is very service specific. That's why we created some opaque metadata, sub-TLV, which can encode information like vendor specific information like brand, version, other data. Any extra information can be encoded in it. We believe in this particular case, we don't have to standardize the opaque type specifically. We want it to be generic. Only the publisher and consumer needs to know about it. So we are throwing that information in there so that the controller can make sense out of it. Implementation status. So whatever we have talked about so far, we have already implemented the proxy functions on the open source hardware. We have implemented on Linux and on FDIO VPP software. We have also implemented the static proxy on Cisco hardware, and that particular demo will be out there and on Cisco's website. We also have SR aware open source work which is going on with some research universities, and that will be available very soon. So we will have services which are fully capable of segment routing processing. Once those are enabled, then that particular service itself becomes a node in a whole segment routing solution. So once that service will be able to send the information to the controller, then the information can be put together by the controller just like any other node. So this is the solution which we are proposing for the service chaining. Any comments, feedback are welcome. Keyur again.
Yes, Keyur Patel, Arcus. I have actually a question for chairs. Couple of IETFs back, Robert and I presented a draft called vector routing, which was intended for service chaining. I have a faint recollection, I might be wrong, but back then the working group had said that service chaining work was not within the charter of this working group. Has that changed?
At that, I recall the same situation. That was going to be one of my next comments. I need to talk to my AD on whether this goes here or whether it's going to go to review by service chaining and then come back from service chaining. So give me a point of order. Always good to hear it, but let me talk to Alvaro. And that's just because I don't have Alvaro here. He'll be here later tomorrow, on Tuesday. So, Care, and will you both send me just a note?
Sure.
So, I'm sorry to ask that, but John and I have dropped a few things, so send me notes. And
yeah, so to be clear, what we are clarifying in this IDR is just the BGP-LS extensions. I presented both the drafts just for the completion.
Yes, I just need to work with Alvaro to find out, does it sit in service chaining and then they request that we add the BGP? Just let me work with Alvaro. Care, will you send me your drafts again?
Yes, of course.
So I make sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks,
okay.
We try to do this, as we talked about earlier with the BGP-LS, we are really trying to be collaborative and make sure we check that everything's working in one working group before we do BGP-LS. So this is not a no, it's just, let me figure out how it works. Okay. That comes to the end of our agenda. I have just a couple points. I have one working group adoption and one, I didn't do an allocation. If there's somebody else that hadn't sent me one, it's a reminder if I've missed your allocation. John and I I've had a life storm where we're sort of bailing water. If you miss getting your allocation, if you miss getting your working group call, do not feel shy about sending John and I several messages. We'll apologize ahead of time, but we'll try to get through all of them. And if you would send it today, I'd appreciate it. I'll summarize to the list. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you to Ignis for the rest. And would the BGP model folks come up and chat with me?
And where are the blue sheets?